member. Congressman, thanks for joining us. Do you get filled in on things that we may not know anything about? Can you add anything to the events of the last 24 hours? Give us some insight.
Well, I think the biggest insight we have is we expected a response. That was not anything that anybody would have not expected from Iran. I mean, the good part about it is it does appear at this point there were no casualties. This seems to be a response in which they sent missiles over into certain areas in which in some ways it seems like they actually telegraphed what they wanted to do. But I think it's important here to notice that Iran wanting to, as your reporter just said, wanting to appear as equal to the United States on the international stage. Well, there's a problem here. Iran is not the equal to the United States on the international stage. Iran is a terrorist state who does terrorist activities. You know, to quote the UN Charter as the reason that they actually responded was sort of a joke, in considering how they actually respond in the Middle East, and especially their reaction to Israel and the other partners in that area. This is just a situation in which a state has isolated itself from the world. The response that the president did was very proportional and very basically muted. Even though we took out Soleimani, he had been very patient over the last year with Iran, and I think we're just seeing that come to a head right now. And I think the president's acting in a very patient, mediated way.
Do you think when the president says all is well, what does he mean by that? That all is well on the bases, or all is well in keeping this conflict where it is right now, and neither side could be expected to accelerate from here?
I think the answer could be yes to both. I think it's not as all as well with our bases. I think that our troops, and having served in Iraq in 2008, this is a very unstable region in which there is a lot of activities and a lot of hostilities that go on during this time. But I think what he basically meant is that all is well. Our bases are secure. Our folks were on heightened alert. They took precautions that they needed to, and also the simple fact that we're going to continue to stand firm in our resolve in what we are doing. And I think it just simply says to Iran that you're not going to intimidate us. We're not a country that you're going to push around, that we're going to stand firm. And this president has made it very clear that he will be patient up to a point, but he will act. He doesn't draw red lines that he has no intention of keeping. But he also doesn't telegraph them either. And I think that's what makes this administration a little different.
Congressman, there's a lot of people on the left, and maybe even some in your party, that at least they are presenting a narrative that we didn't need to get here, that, yeah, he was a bad guy. Everybody agreed with that. The Obama administration designated Soleimani as a terrorist, but they had opportunities to do this and decided that the unforeseen consequences, the loss of life on both sides, wouldn't be worth doing it. Do you think that something in recent weeks pushed that up to where it made sense to do this, even though there could be this type of outcome now?
Well, it is sort of amazing to me, my friends on the left who are now upset about this and talking about the possible consequences. It's amazing how the whole country came together, that when Osama bin Laden was killed, both left and right came together to recognize that taking out a terrorist was something that you did that was appropriate. I think the interesting part here is that in this taking out, it was not just something that just came out of the blue. This was an escalating event from Iran over the past year, with issues in the Straits of Hormuz and other things in Iraq, and the terrorist activities that they're supporting in Syria and other places. But remember here, it is amazing for those on the left to criticize this. I would just ask them, what would they say to the Gold Star families here in the United States who lost family members because of what Soleimani had been doing over the years? What would they say to those veterans right now who are at Walter Reed and other places who lost limbs and arms because of what he did providing the IEDs in Iraq and how he went about that terrorist campaign? Look, at this point in time, Soleimani was a terrorist. Soleimani was killed. Soleimani is put in the history books, and now it's time for us to move on. If Iran wants to actually take part in the world stage as a true world participant, then they've got to release their terroristic activities and quit being a nation that is backward looking and start looking forward and be a part of the world stage.
We'll return to this, but you were front and center during the impeachment hearings, obviously, as a ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. What can you tell us about what Senator McConnell has started today? Is it possible to start a trial without the articles being delivered?
Well, I don't think it's going to be a start of a trial without articles being delivered. But here's a question that's not being asked. Why is Nancy Pelosi being allowed to get away with this statement? She says, I'm not going to send the articles over until I know what they're going to do, so I'll know who to pick as my folks that I need to be the prosecutors or the folks from the House as far as her team to go over and execute this trial. This is the case. They've made their case. They had their hearings over here. We believe them to be a sham, is what they said. They are now, I believe, ashamed of what they did over here. And to say that she doesn't know who to put on the team to go over as managers from the House is simply ridiculous. She should be held accountable to say, you have a body of work. This is a case. You made your case. You sent the articles over. You did it before the House. To tell us that she's trying to figure out who to send over is a joke. It is a sham. And she should be ashamed of herself right now. And the press ought to be holding her accountable for that, because this is not go have a new trial and we'll decide who to send over then. No, you've made your case. Now go defend it. If you don't defend it, then, you know, you've told the American people this is nothing but a political stunt to get at this president.
Do you see any cracks developing I've heard about Murkowski, I've heard about Susan Collins, I've heard, you know, these other, and John Bolton's ready to testify. But I watched the predicted the futures, and nothing's moving on the possibility of a conviction in the Senate. How is this going to? When is this going to be over? There's a potential war starting. I mean, is this ever going to be in the rearview mirror, or can you leave this? Can it be evergreen for the Democrats right up to November?
They want it to be, because they have nobody to run against President Trump in November. But I think the problem here is it's up to Nancy Pelosi. It's time for the media to start asking Nancy Pelosi, you have no excuse. Send them over. This is not a trial that you did. You have already made your case. Name your managers and send it to the Senate. But it is interesting that Murkowski and Collins and all these names keep getting brought up in the media. They actually come out and said they support Mr. McConnell's view that we should take the Clinton impeachment rules and begin this trial. There's no cracks developing. In fact, we all know how this is going to end. Let's just go ahead and get it done. Let's go ahead and let the president make his case, let the Democrat managers make their case, and then settle it and be done with it and move on with what the American people care about, and that's more themselves, not us.
Okay.
Congressman, I was actually going to pivot back to the Middle East and just try to get your sense of where you think, of sort of the larger implications, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, and some of what are considered sort of proxy countries or allies, whether you think we're going to stay there, whether we're going to get forced out, how this is going to change the dynamic or not.
Yeah, I think it's actually, I think the balance that the president has tried to strike with small forces that are able to do things that we need to do in the region and prepare for, what is a supportive role in that region has been a good thing. And I think we'll continue to see that pull back, but also be very strategic in what we do. Remember, our military is the best in the world. We don't need, as other countries do, a lot of people to carry out what we can do with very few people. And I think that is our role in this area, is being that stabilizer. Because after this week, we have now reasserted the fact that Iran, you're not going to be able to just unilaterally do whatever you want. You're not going to have your lead terrorists go over and stir up stuff in Syria and Iraq. And remember, there's one thing we didn't mention earlier. From last week before Soleimani was killed, we remember they attacked sovereign American soil. This is something we have to be aware of. You don't get to attack embassies the way that they did, and with Soleimani being in the background of that, and not pay a price for it. So I think there's been a balancing and a stabilization in the region that America is now looked upon again as a player, but not in a player in which we're sending massive troops. That's not something we need to do. I think our role there now is providing the stability for the region that needs to be there.
Congressman, you don't see tensions escalating from here, that sounds like then?
At this point, we'll see. I think frankly, this is in the Iranians' hands. The Iranians have been pushing this for a year. This is a story that's not been told a lot. If you look over the past year, whether it be in the Straits of Hormuz, whether it be in the terrorist activities in Syria, really the taking over of influence in Iraq with their government, you start looking at this. This was something that the president actually showed great restraint on. And so I think what we're seeing here is now, when he made his statement, when he said we're going to do this, they attacked with the missiles and the base where our contractor was killed. Then they took out Soleimani. I think the escalation now is at a part where Iran really has to take stock in the world and say, really, what do we want to do here? And I think that's the part we're at. So I do believe that this is going to be maybe a calming period, and maybe we can move on from there. Maybe Iran realizes that they may have to change their ways as well.
All right, Congressman Collins, thanks. We appreciate you being on today. See you later.
It's good to be with y'all. Take care.